Hello, I'm Gary Strong, a Chartered Building Surveyor and Global Building Standards Director at RICS. I'm joined by my colleague Ben Elder, who is a Chartered Valuation Surveyor and Global Valuation Director here at RICS.
Today we're going to try and give you some information regarding the building regulations around the valuation of tower blocks. This is in the light of the Grenfell disaster in June 2017 and the necessity to make sure that the valuation process delivers a professional service to our clients. The important part is that we act professionally as valuers, and we're aware of the building regulations that pertain to fire safety in tower blocks. This doesn't mean to say that you need the same detail as perhaps a building surveyor, but it is essential that you do understand the fire building regulations and the effect it might have on the valuation of a building.
The Building Regulations 2010 are written in a functional form with guidance as to how that function can be satisfied in the approved documents. The approved documents are simply guidance, they are not the regulations. The requirements regarding fire safety will be found in Approved Document B, which in turn is split into two approved documents that give guidance, with Volume 1 dealing with dwelling houses and Volume 2 dealing with all other buildings. The guidance for flats is contained in Volume 2, and today we are going to be looking at just flats in blocks. The approved documents are lengthy documents and are open to interpretation. We are not expecting you, as valuation professionals, to be experts in these documents. Each flat is considered as a fire compartment and is surrounded by fire-resisting walls and floors, with the flat entrance door being usually a 30-minute fire-resisting door, commonly referred to as a FD30 door. This is designed so that if any fire breaks out in the flat, it is contained within the flat and does not spread beyond that area. It is now recommended that fire doors are upgraded where possible to full FD30S spec, which includes 3 fire-resisting hinges, door closer, cold smoke seals and intermittent strips. In order that compartmentation is achieved, the requirements are that any separating element is fire protected and sealed by the use of fire stops. This is particularly important for services, pipes, cables and the like, which penetrate through a fire compartment wall. Each flat should have a smoke detector and alarm that will sound only in the flat to warn the occupants so that they may make their escape. Smoke detectors are largely responsible for the reduction in deaths from fire in residential premises and must be maintained at all times. Modern smoke detectors will be mains electric with a standby battery power supply as required for all new build flats. A let flat must have a working smoke detector at the beginning of the tenancy. It is not law to have a smoke detector in older existing buildings which are not let, but they are highly recommended. Fire alarms are not mandatory either. Approved Document B, Section 1.4, advises that all new flats should be provided with a fire detection and fire alarm system, but older blocks may not be fitted with a system. If a fire risk assessment determines there is a higher fire risk in the block, a fire alarm may have been recommended or already installed. Where there are commercial units in the block, a fire alarm is required. Fire alarms are subject to false alarms, but increasingly tenants and owners are demanding their installation be retrofitted, and it is now becoming more common for them to be installed, even though they may not be strictly necessary. If one is installed, it needs to be regularly checked, and in a higher risk building, we recommend it is checked weekly. Others in the same building are meant to be protected by the compartmentation in the event of an isolated fire, and this policy is called the stay put policy, and recent events have questioned this. The alternative simultaneous evacuation policy can cause the fire and rescue services an issue of gaining access quickly to an upper floor if, for example, people are trying to evacuate at the same time. Each block has to be considered on its merits in determining the appropriate fire strategy. The common areas of flats, such as corridors and stairs, are treated as though they are sterile and enclosed in a fire-resisting structure. Once an occupant of a flat escapes a flat, the concept is that they are in a fire-protected means of escape route until they reach safety externally. There are some simple things you may notice and could usefully comment on in your report during an inspection of the common parts. whether a fire alarm is installed with call points adjacent to final exit doors, but remember it is not mandatory. Whether there is emergency lighting provided in the event of a total power failure, but they are not mandatory. Whether there are fire action notices, whether there are fire exit signs, whether the building is adequately maintained with no rubbish, etc., stored in the common parts which may be a fire risk. The presence or not of fire extinguishers. Note that these are not mandatory and often are not provided in the common parts of blocks due to behaviour issues. Whether fire doors look to be reasonably maintained or appear to be missing. Whether the walls and ceilings are appropriately fire resisting. The presence of polystyrene ceiling tiles, for example, would be cause for concern.
Let's discuss sprinklers. There's been a lot of debate about these recently.
Sprinklers are our first defence in fire spreading from the room or compartment of origin. Although they have a vital role to play, they are not legally required in all buildings. New build flats are not required to have sprinklers fitted under the current building regulations in England unless the building they are in is over 30 metres high, when it is a requirement within approved document B. If that is the case, then all the flats require sprinklers, not the common parts. This requirement currently only applies to new build. There is no requirement under the building regulations to retrofit sprinklers in individual existing flats that are undergoing refurbishment. However, a fire engineered approach may mean that a sprinkler system is accepted as not required in a new building over 30 metres high, so be careful not to assume just because there is no sprinkler system it does not comply. In Wales, it is now a requirement to fit sprinklers in all new residential premises. The London Assembly are currently consulting on proposals to retrofit sprinklers in all buildings, which we do not believe is necessary, only those buildings which are determined as higher risk. However, it is possible to use sprinklers as a compensatory measure under a fire engineering solution should there be some other problematic aspect, such as extended travel distances or poor compartmentation. This type of fire engineered solution should only be used by a chartered fire engineer following a full consultation with the Fire and Rescue Services and the local authority building control.
Much has been said recently about external cladding systems. The drive for greater insulation has meant lots of new products coming on the marketplace.
Approved document B says this in section 12. External wall construction. 12.5. The external envelope of a building should not provide a medium for fire spread if it is likely to be a risk to health or safety. The use of combustible materials in the cladding system and extensive cavities may present such a risk in tall buildings. External walls should either meet the guidance given in paragraphs 12.6 to 12.9 or meet the performance criteria given in the BRE report, Fire Performance of External Thermal Insulation for Walls of Multi-Storey Buildings, BR 135, for cladding systems using full-scale test data from BS 84141 2002 or BS 84142 2005. The total amount of combustible material may also be limited in practice by the provisions for space separation in section 13, see paragraph 13.7 onwards. The approved document requires that any material used in the external wall of any building over 18 metres high should be of limited combustibility so that fire will not spread over its surface. Insulation materials and products. 12.7. In a building with a storey 18 metres or more above ground level, any insulation products, filler material, not including gaskets, sealants and similar, etc. used in the external wall construction should be of limited combustibility, see Appendix A. This restriction does not apply to masonry cavity wall construction, which complies with diagram 34 in section 9. However, the term limited combustibility has come in for criticism post-Grenfell, and some commentators are calling for all external cladding and insulation to be simply non-combustible. The government have been seeking details of the number of tower blocks over 18 metres high which have cladding which fails the BS 8414 tests, and there are now known to be over 300 such blocks which will have to be dealt with.
As a professional valuer, a desk study should be undertaken to establish if any cladding has been tested and what the results of those tests were. The likely cost of remedial work is likely to be very high, and discussion should take place with the instructing client at the earliest opportunity. Unfortunately, information locally may not be readily available, and a willing purchaser may be unaware in advance of making an offer and applying for a valuation. If the cladding and insulation have failed the tests and will have to be replaced, there is obviously an implication for costs. Early indications are that this could be as high as £10,000 to £75,000 per flat, and will obviously affect the value on the open market. Our ICS is aware of some blocks where the consequences of the remedial work have stalled and the funding has become an issue. You should also be very careful with the comparable evidence that you use to ensure that you have full knowledge of the underlying cost implications. Remember, you need to act professionally at all times. It's the quality of your investigations, not the time spent, which is important. No one will thank you for rushing into a valuation which has not been properly considered with all the facts of the building.
We hope that this information briefly updates you, and we will be producing more updates in the future. Our ICS is working closely with the UK Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government to produce central government advice for building owners.